Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Coach's Corner. I am Baroness Sive. I am standing in for Vesper tonight because she couldn't be with us. So, quick rundown. We're going to go over victory conditions and ruthless self-assessment tonight. Please, please, please drop your questions in the chat, in the comments. We will do our best to get to all of them, and if we don't get to all of them, coaches are really good about going back and answering them later. It's not personal, we just only have so much time. So, with that, I'm going to hand it off to Sean, and you guys can take it away.
Right on. Thank you, Saib. Hey, good evening, everybody. And thank you for joining us again on the Coach's Corner. We're always really happy to have everybody tuning in every Friday night to listen to us yammer on about all the fighty stuff. So this is a topic that we decided to throw in here because we talk about victory conditions and self-assessment on this show all the time. And we wanted to give some more concrete definitions of what this is and how we use these tools to evaluate our students and ourselves, to kind of give some perspective on the training process to make it really a little bit more manageable. So tonight we are joined by, we have a special guest with us, Duchess Sir Helga from the West Kingdom, who talks about ruthless self-assessment in particular quite a bit. So we asked her to kind of give her definitions. And we're also joined by Sir Octamasades from Montier and His Excellency Sagan from also here in Artemisia, a couple of our regular coaches. So we're going to start with victory conditions. Again, this is a term that we use a lot, and we don't want people to be too confused about what this is and how we use it. So my definition of victory conditions basically comes down to what has to happen in your fighting experience for you to feel like your experience has been a success, to feel like you've made some progress, or basically what is your victory. That's what the definition of victory condition. What has to happen for you to feel like your experience was a success? And if you are going to a tournament, for instance, if you go to Crown Tourney and your only measure of success, the only way you consider that you had a successful day is if you win that tournament, you are going to be grossly disappointed a vast majority of the times. Only one person can win that list, and statistically speaking, it's not going to be you. It can be, but if that is your only measure of success, if that's the only way you can feel like you did everything right or did anything right, you are going to be disappointed a lot. And that is a very extreme example of how victory conditions can get in the way. To kind of simplify that a little bit more, sometimes your victory condition is just showing up to practice and putting on your armor. Sometimes that is the win that you are going to get for the day. And as we define our victory conditions and we approach practice and we approach training and we approach tournament with good, solid victory conditions in mind, understanding what it would take for us to feel like we had a successful day at practice. And a lot of times when we're at practice, it's like, if I need to fix a thing, everything I do has to be focused on improvement in that one part of the fight. And any victory that I get, any win that I get at practice that does not somehow include progress in this thing I'm trying to correct, I have to consider that a failure. That gets a little more into the ruthless self-assessment. But with that, I think I'm going to turn this over to Helga and have her give a little follow-up on that.
All right, so in victory conditions, and this is actually kind of key to training for me, is my definition is very similar to His Grace's. It's just slightly shorter. It's the goals, ideas, or applied concepts that we choose to focus on and then make our emotional cookie. And so by making it a win, it then becomes a victory, thus victory conditions. And the one thing that we have to remember in victory conditions is they must be obtainable. You cannot make your victory conditions, especially in training and tournament, wildly unattainable, otherwise what we call as WIGs, wildly unattainable goals. And those things must be concrete and reachable, because otherwise you will be setting yourself up for failure. And again, we'll do that later with ruthless self-assessment, because you use ruthless self-assessment to reassess your victory conditions and reset the bar so you can continue on your path of progress. And so victory conditions, the small, easy steps towards an end idea or an end goal that you can apply to your fighting.
Yeah. Sagan?
Oh, I totally agree with what's been said so far. In addition, the idea is, as has already been said, keep it simple. If you need to, that's great. It can be adjusted as you go along, right? If you were unrealistic, okay, so we reassess. So my victory condition wasn't A, but it was B and C. So ergo, we go into it not with absolute concrete must have. If it doesn't happen, there's no reason to keep going attitudes. We go into it with, here's where I'm headed. I'm going to do everything I can to get there. And a victory condition being a successful outcome for maybe one or more aspects, there's a lot of room for success.
Octa?
I look at victory conditions as a mean to attaining goals. And I like to set multi-level goals, both short-term instant gratification and more longer-term stuff. But setting those victory conditions and being able to achieve them, it's kind of like practicing your flat snap. Set victory conditions day to day. Make it a habit that you get up and set some victory conditions that you can achieve. And then it becomes part of your process. And it's easier to remember to set those victory conditions when you're going to a practice or a tournament or working on your kit. And it becomes something that becomes second nature and deliberate, just like your fight.
Yeah. So one of the ways that I use this in one of the drills that I teach, the 2-second drill that you guys have heard me talk about before, you know, early on in fighting, a lot of newer fighters are hesitant to throw shots because they feel like they need a giant target zone to hit. And so one of the things that I do to kind of change that mentality is to encourage fighters to throw at any legal target, anything that's an inch and a quarter. That's all the target that we really need. And when I talk about the victory conditions with this particular drill and this mindset is early on, it's true that your mechanics and your timing are not going to be as crisp as they are for me. And yeah, some of the shots that you throw are not going to land. They're not going to result in a victory. You're not going to one-shot anybody in your first year of practice, really. So what we're looking at there is I have people just remind them that if you see an inch and a quarter of anything, you just fire a shot at it. Because if you throw a valid shot, you throw a good shot at a valid target, that should be considered a success. Because if you throw a good shot at a valid target and I block that shot, right, I've done my job right as well, but that doesn't negate the fact that you did what you were supposed to do. And the more you throw at those smaller targets, the smaller your target zone is going to become. And that's just one way that we can look at like pinpointing something very specific in even just a drill to be able to say my victory is I saw a valid target, I saw an inch and a quarter of a target, and I threw a good mechanic at that. That's a win, right? And we have to look at that as a win. And you know, when we're looking at this, you know, we don't want to, you know, winning is always better than losing, right? I mean, ours is definitely a sport where success in our sport is ultimately defined by that one by body count, right? That's what people ultimately are, measure our success on. But that concern for wins and losses is actually debilitating and counterintuitive or counterproductive to learning the sport. And so by breaking down these victory conditions and just saying that you know, I was able to hit the leg on this one person, or I was able to stop them from hitting the leg on me, you know, those are small things. And even if they don't result in a win, when we're talking about this, we're not preaching a losing mentality. We're not saying it's okay to lose. But what we're saying is losing happens. It's a fact. And so what are you going to do with it? Because if all of your victory condition is wrapped up in winning a fight, it's really going to weigh on you quite a bit.
It's going to be exhausting.
Yeah.
You'll be really tired.
Mhm.
No, I mean,
Sagan, go ahead, Octa.
I was just going to say there's a lot of fundamental things, no matter what stage you are in your fighting career or your path, that victory conditions can help just refocus. Posture. Constantly, when you're trying out new things and you're exploring new techniques, sometimes your posture starts to suffer. So one of my mainline victory conditions while I'm working on things is to maintain posture. And it helps me remember, oh, yeah, that felt wrong. I wasn't in posture. You go back and look at a video and like, okay, yep, I failed here and here. So I need to continue to work on that particular victory condition throughout these new techniques. So it's not just, the victory conditions are not just for new folks. Everybody can use these things to help keep perspective and not focus on what we tend to gravitate towards is winning that next fight or winning that tournament. All these victory conditions and good habits and goals build to that without having to focus on it.
Okay. As his grace Sean mentioned, we're talking about a range when we're talking about training and practice from a brand new fighter all the way to the top 2% when we're working with them. A lot of times victory conditions for a brand new fighter is, this stick isn't as heavy as it was last time. This shield, I like this strapping better than I like the other one. I'm not as worried about being hit as I was before. And a lot of the successful outcomes, they may never even have been in armor and been struck yet, and they're worried about being struck. So a lot of times with newer fighters, you set yourself up in armor, as His Grace said. They need to understand the legal targets. They need to understand that the minimum blade is 1.25 inches and it needs to fit through a slot, even though the concussion point where they meet on armor is different than that on skin. But at that point, all you're trying to get them to do is recognize, here are the very basics of our sport. And here is what I would ask you to accomplish. And maybe at first it's vocal. How many targets do you see? And what blows that the minimal that we've already shown you would you use to get there? And then the same thing with the defense. You have them put a shield in place and you say, what targets on you do you believe are open? And then in very slow speed or, just ask them, okay, so pick the leg shot and swing the stick or place the stick on the target to prove to yourself that the target does exist. And a lot of that is the fact that the object lesson being part of a victory condition is it proves to them, oh, it is open, right? They're not worried about it going to be blocked, not this time. You are providing them the opportunity to get that object lesson of, oh, that works. And then you tell them, I'm going to throw this shot at your helmet, and I want you to move your shield to block the shot. Obviously, this is very slow at first. You start getting up into upper unbelted knights and the top 2%, things change dramatically. But not down here, they don't. But the concepts and the victory conditions are still the same. You're asking, they're responding, and then you can talk about it.
Right. So we had we had a question that was posted in the thread here that I'll go ahead and ask Helga. What is a small victory condition you can teach your students so they can find success on a frustrating day?
You mean my own question?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
What?
You're right. It's a great question. Let's have you answer that.
All right. So we always set up, assessing yourself and assessing your students for victory conditions, I always have them revert to an easy victory. So there's always kind of like one victory condition in there that they can revert to if needed. So something that they were successful last practice, So if you have if you yourself is getting frustrated or your student is getting frustrated, you have them revert back to an old victory condition to get them back into the mindset of success. Like, cool, we know that this one will go off. We know this victory condition works. So let's go back to that. This is now the new victory condition. We have missed something somewhere and set you up for failure, or I've set myself up for failure. So on the fly, ruthless self-assessment of now we're reverting back to an easier thing to do. So if you've got a mid-level unbelt student that is having trouble throwing offsides, well, you got their flat snap down, right? Cool. Set aside that one shot for right now. Let's go to where you're back to success, get you back into a successful mind space and like way to see the fight. Then we can see if we can add that victory condition in after we do an out of armor assessment on why it's not going off. I do this to myself all the time going into fights where maybe I had a bad day. Like I don't feel like working on a super deep issue right now. So I'm going to work on an easier victory condition and something that I have some experience and time in. So like right now, my thing is making sure my toes are pointed in the correct direction at the end of my shot. So I'm then loaded to go to the next thing. Been drilling it for 6 months. It is something that I can easily refocus my fight on and give myself a way to be successful while setting aside the new thing that I was working on that maybe now I'm super frustrated about, and it's just nuking the rest of my fight. So this is a really easy way. We actually do this in training with like all things is always go back to success. So look at your student and tell them like, hey, no, we're going back to this old victory condition right now because you are so locked out, you're never going to get there.
Yeah.
And well, I like that because oftentimes when we get to somebody and somebody starts to get frustrated or you've explained it and you've used all the vernacular you're able to that night, stepping back into, okay, let's go back to what you're comfortable with. The last point where we both connected good, for instance, that flat snap. And now let's throw that. And now let's add a step. So the victory condition is to be able to step and throw that. And then you expand that and you find another little chunk you can plug into that. And eventually then you can kind of steer them back. Oh, and now all of a sudden you're throwing your offside again, like kind of that example. So adding smaller chunks and smaller micro mechanics into those victory conditions to slowly build on that. Maybe you cut too big of a chunk off. So I think that's a really great point. And kind of to that, looks like Branos is on and throwing up good questions about what kind of victory conditions might be good for new and old fighters since we might be starting fighting soon. So some of the victory conditions I've been looking at is my kit. So my victory conditions starting this weekend are to go through and make sure my kit's in good repair. My lady's done a great job making me look nice. So I got to make sure everything works good underneath all the coverings. So that's some victory conditions that I know can satisfy my need for some instant gratification and also get me closer to practice. I would also say that all of these foundational mechanics that we harp on in all our other episodes, great victory conditions. Footwork, just take a ruthless self-assessment of your footwork and set some victory conditions. Move differently than you normally move and evaluate that. Posture, you're never too good not to focus on your posture. Mechanics, take your sword mechanic and ask yourself why, and set some smaller victory conditions of analyzing those. And how does that mechanic start? How does it transition? How does it end? For the higher end fighters, you can really get into that and really discover some great things you might not have been able to put together, and then breaking all that down into smaller chunks and reapplying it. So all about the foundations. And also when you're not in your armor and you're not at practice, the physicality of it. Set victory conditions to set a routine up, whether that's 3 things you're going to do every day or 15, depending on your physicality. Get out for a walk at lunch when you can and start building that cardio. It just blasted in all caps. Cardio is
Sorry, I'm just like everybody right now. We have been sitting on our asses for a year. Like cardio is a huge thing for training. If you don't have the breath, you can't keep training. It doesn't matter how strong you are or like how often you're in your armor. If you can't breathe, you're not fighting and you're not training. So one victory condition, can you run the block? Can you run a mile? Probably a really good place to start.
absolutely.
Yeah. Now is the time. We have harped on, here pretty quick, the green light's going to go on. And when that green light goes on, where will you be in all of the aspects that have been discussed already? Where are you now? And if it went on next week, where would you be? Went on next month, 2 months, right? Self-assessment. We're going to get critical here in a little bit. But the idea is, where am I now? Where do I need to be? And I don't care if you're a newer fighter, older fighter, we have not been faced with this before. And when the green light goes on, there are going to be crown tournaments. And just the word tournament at this point should really perk your ears up and make you think, could I make it through a tournament?
Without it,
Is there a possibility of injury based on my current conditioning? You know, there's so many things. Just as Sir Octa said, get your armor and your weapons ready. You know, even that on the mental side, that's a really good victory condition. I'm ready to go. Right? If you haven't held a stick in a year, well, it might be time to pick one up and find a telephone pole or a pal or something. But again, this is the time, not waiting for the green light to go on and go, oh, now I need to check. What do I need to do? And what was that cardio word? What's her name said? I don't know what that means. I better look into that, because what if it's important? So take stock now, set victory conditions. And again, some of them don't have to be huge, right? Maybe it's, I'm going to get my legs strapped. Maybe it's, I'm going to retape, 2 swords in a week. Whatever it is, make it positive, make it possible, and just get her done.
Yeah, we actually did a couple episodes on this about, starting up, what to do when we start up practice again. And when we get back to fighting, we need to keep in mind that you are not going to be the fighter you were when you were fighting once a week for the last, even 5 years. So, and one of the things about that is, whatever you get day one is probably what your body knows the best. Because you haven't been focusing on, on getting rid of those bad habits. I mean, all that muscle memory is in there. So when you get out to practice, when we can start doing this again, it's going to be a little bit before you can truly identify who you are as a fighter now. And, if you've been able to fight, once or twice or 3 times throughout this last year, that's not enough. That's not enough to do it. If you're not doing this at least once a week, you're not having any kind of consistency in who you are as a fighter. So a lot of what's going to be coming up when we do get started again, you're going to have to look at those victory conditions and understand that, day one is just going to be a mess, and that's okay, because you just need to know, you need to take assessment of where you actually are in your fight, not where you were a year ago when you got done with Estrella. For a lot of us, I mean, that was the last big war that we had before all of this really shut down. You are not the same fighter that you were when you left Estrella last year. And so when you're looking at victory conditions and you're looking at that assessment, it's going to be, who am I really, right? Because it doesn't matter how good you are. We've all lost a step. We've all been sitting on the bench, and some of the training that we have, yeah, it's going to kick in pretty quick. But for a lot of the mid-range fighters, you're not going to be who you were, and you need to be okay with that. You need to just take a look at where you actually are, not where you thought you used to be. If that makes sense. And we had another question that came up about it. From Thorin out in the East, said, from a mechanic standpoint, would you use teaching the kinetic chain as a victory condition, getting the fighter to be aware of how to throw the shot versus just arming it? So when we had several months ago, we had Count Steinar from Eldemir was on, and he was going through some of the videos that he's made for doing stick mechanics. And I thought I had a pretty good description of the different parts of stick mechanics, but the way he was able to break it down was really, really just impressive. And I think that's what he's talking about here with the, that kinetic chain, everything that's happening from the ground up through your hip, up through your shoulder, out to extending that. And yeah, absolutely. I mean, you can use victory conditions for any portion of this. If you don't feel your hip rotate on every shot, I mean, then you need to consider that a failure. If you're just using your arm to throw your shots out there, you need to consider that a failure. You don't get victory if you don't use your body right. One of the things that I'm always harping on in our sport is recovery. Wherever you start your shot from, being able to get that back through your shoulder and being able to get good mechanics on that next shot. Recovery to me is the single greatest failing in our sport. It's the one thing that people fail to do most frequently, and it's one of the easiest things to fix. And so, yeah, if you and part of the 2-second drill that I teach is it's a recovery drill. You throw the one, you get it back to your shoulder, and if you flip flop into another shot, you have to consider that a failure, even in a drill, right? I mean, Sagan says all the time, nobody wins the drill. Well, boy, but we can lose the drill.
Yep.
Right. And that drill is specifically set up to say, if you do not do this, part of the victory of this drill in knowing what it is to have done things correctly. If you don't get the stick to go through your shoulder, you fail, right? Sagan, you got more on that?
Well, it is one of those primary truths that, again, in that chain, there's absolute truth, right? So whether, again, I'm going to go back to the analogy I used just a few minutes ago, whether it's a newbie and they're just trying to place the stick on me, which the kinetic chain is completely different than that of a top 2%er, right? But the idea is you're getting it into their head, oh, there is form to this, and doing the form correctly is a victory condition. And if I am unsuccessful, there will still be pieces of it, like maybe my mental recognition of the target, that is a victory condition. And it is our job as coaches and trainers to, on the fly, assess, as Sir Octa somewhat mentioned, how's the trainee doing? Did they have a failure? Did something immediately change once that happened? What's going on here? Because at the end of the day, and at the end of the practice or the training session, it is, in my humble opinion, and something I always did, my job to make sure that the person who is allowing me to work with them finishes on a victory condition when, just before they leave. Now, whether or not that had anything to do with the victory conditions we laid out for the training or practice session was of no consequence to me. It was my job to make sure they finished on.
Well, and just real quick, just to speak to what you're talking about, with Sean, you're talking about placing the sword on the target, inch and a quarter target, and that's a victory condition. You go up a couple levels in fighter, and now it's how did you place your sword on that target? And then you go up a little bit more, it's how did you get from A to B to there to da, and then what triggers that? And what are you using? What foot's forward? How are you bolting or using your hip to get it to there? So these victory conditions for kind of one general mechanic can evolve along with the fighter. It's the flat snap's always a viable victory condition. It's just how in depth and how micro are you going to go with it?
Indeed.
Round. Helga, you had some other thoughts on that?
I mean, I had thoughts on like multiple things beforehand, but focusing on like just the mechanics, like this should be an automatic. This should be just one of your regular victory conditions because we will always improve. So when you start, you have a very broad platform of what your victory condition can be, and as you get better, it narrows down or it refines into subcategories underneath it. And so there is almost always a form of a victory condition in anybody that I've ever worked with about their mechanics, about that kinetic motion in the fight. And so I would say, yeah, and it should always be there. Other than that, I believe that it was covered brilliantly by the three gentlemen also on the show.
Right on, which means you're going to lead us right into ruthless self-assessment.
because we are getting a ton of questions on that.
Well, and
So-
it's important to point out that these two things go hand in hand as well.
Oh yeah, ruthless. Neither of these work without the other. And so you hear us use it all the time. And one of the things that I wanted to point out is before we go into ruthless self-assessment, there's something that most people should understand, that while training, winning is an accidental byproduct of properly executed technique, timing, and range control.
Yeah.
Your win is always accidental. And if you treat it as such, it will allow you to use these two tools way simpler and with much less emotional response. So, ruthless self-assessment. You've heard us use this term multiple times throughout the show already, and we're already getting a ton of questions about it, so might as well get into it. Ruthless self-assessment is a critical eye or a analytical eye placed on whatever you are doing, and this happens to be fighting. And so to get into the idea of it is it's not unkind. And it is not, being ruthless does not mean being mean to yourself or your students. If you ever become mean to yourself or your students, what you are doing is you are actually undermining the victory conditions and you are undermining the idea of analyzation within the fight. And also it means you've got an emotional attachment to the outcome. So that is one place to always check yourself, because you'll hear us say ruthless and people equate ruthless with mean versus just honest. So you need to be prepared to be honest with yourself about your goals, your assessment, and the feedback you are both giving and receiving. It's not, you're gonna hear me say it multiple times. It's not cruel. If you get cruel with it, you're not doing it. You're just being mean. And this is the ability to look at the differences in what your idea was about what is going on, where you're at, and what is actually going on. So to be able to ruthlessly assess yourself or your students is to be able to look at the situation and calculate their abilities or your abilities, what the victory conditions were set out in that situation, and how it's actually all turning out. Then being able to turn it on its head and figuring out what you need to change to get there. So ruthless self-assessment is pretty much being analytical about your fight without the emotional attachment where you become abusive to yourself or those around you.
Yeah, and that's the really important part is, we say ruthless because it needs to be honest, but you can't ever let yourself get to the point where you're constantly saying it's not good enough, right? It's not so much that it's not good enough. It's more that it can always be better. But when you venture into that territory where you get to thinking that that you'll never be good enough, that you're fighting is, that you can't have any kind of victory, or that you're just not doing anything right, that's when you start becoming abusive. And it is definitely something we need to keep in mind as trainers and how we're evaluating our students. But the danger in becoming cruel is typically, we are our own worst critics. And so typically it's going to be the individual themselves who is hammering on themselves the hardest, and who is most likely to, yes, Helga's pointing the fingers at herself there. And yeah, that's true. I mean, we are the ones that are most likely to do the most damage to our own success by saying that we're not good enough, and that we're never going to be good enough. And that's totally not the point of this ruthless self-assessment. The whole point of this is that it can always be better. And sometimes you're gonna have to take a moment to say, I've made improvements on this. And again, victory conditions. I've made improvements on this since the last Queen's Champion that I was in. So in the last Defenders Tourney that I was in, I've made progress on this thing. Now I need to make more progress on another thing, or what have you, or how do I refine this one thing even more? And we use these as tools, and really just kind of as a benchmark, really, to kind of break down the process and understand that you don't just come out day one and start kicking ass, right? I mean, if this is easy, everybody could do it, and it's not. I mean, this is something that it takes some work to be elite at, and if you if you look at crown tourney as this end all be all of what that success is, then like you'll feel like you can never get there, but how do you eat an elephant, right? One bite at a time, right? Octa, you next.
I was just gonna add to that, something that really helps a ruthless self-assessment, because ultimately it's the honesty, right? If you lie to yourself, then it's easy in our sport for your opponent to lie to you. And that's my job, is to lie to you and make you believe things that aren't really true. So when you're assessing yourself and you're really trying to break it down, find somebody that you can work with, whether it's a mentor or a contemporary, and bounce things off, because it's really great to be able to have somebody come and say, hey, I just suck at this. I can't make this work. And you say, whoa, let's stop. Victory conditions. How does this work? And you work with them and say, just like we said earlier, hey, this isn't working. Let's go back to something that works, and let's find a path or find another interest. The beautiful thing about our sport is, at our hearts, the people that are passionate about this, we're artists. Chances are there's something else in your life you do that you can maybe apply some thought process to, that will help kick you into a different thought process in your fighting, or reevaluate the way you look at this stuff. And that's sometimes somebody who is not you can step in and be less critical about your art, because it's not their art, and give you some good sounding board to say, here, let's break this part that you're stuck on apart, or let's put it over here in the timeout pile and let's go work on something else. So having somebody that you can trust to just bounce stuff back and forth of, that will give you honesty, maybe without so much beating up. And I had a thought here for just a second and it went away.
That's all right. I got something I can pile on with that too. When Octa's talking about having somebody that is going to give you that honest assessment, without beating you down, one of the things that I've one of the kind of measures that I've used for this is, if you look at you go into a tournament and say you're in a pooled list or a round robin, and you get to fight 8 people in the tournament, right? You come out of your pool after beating 7 of those people, right? And one of the questions that I ask is, of the fights that you won, how many of those fights did you win, and how many of those fights did your opponent lose? And this is what we mean by ruthless. It's really easy for us to sit and look at body count as its own individual thing and say, well, I won, didn't I? And so that's all that matters, is I get a W in get a notch in the W column, right? And that's great. I mean, yeah, winning fights is what moves us, advances us in the list. But is what you did, is that repeatable? Is it something that is only going to work against that one opponent? And how is that going to work against those top 2 percenters, right? And so being able to look at those things and with just that critical eye, and that's a fair question to ask. I was like, did you win that fight, or did your opponent lose that fight?
And
So
one thing about self-assessment, it's self-assessment. It's not measuring yourself against somebody else all the time. That's a really important thing, is you can control you. That should be your focus. If you can control you 80% of the time, that's pretty damn good. 90%, wow. And I've never been able to control myself 100% of the time. But it's about you, not anybody else. You can measure against other folks, but when you're assessing yourself, it's about you.
Right. And we must remember, we're talking about assessment here. This is ruthless self-assessment, but this is not in any way meant to be self-demoralization or self-destruction. This is assessment, which means that we're looking to a positive outcome. Now, that outcome may be obvious to us. Oh, okay, my right foot is in the wrong place. I didn't throw it on time. My trigger was late. Or it may not be obvious. And as Octa mentioned, right, enlist the help of someone. The good news is, again, I'm gonna get a video camera or borrow one or do whatever, because now we can share video at the drop of a hat, right? You can have us look at it. You can have, again, a contemporary look at it, your trainer, your knight, a squire brother, a fellow fighter in your local area, and you look at it together and go, you're right. And again, part of this is trust, but verify. Because if you've been battling something for weeks and you've tried unknowing solutions and it's just not working, well, get some help. This is self-assessment. And if part of that assessment is, I really need somebody else's eyes on this because, that's what I want to do. That's a victory condition, realizing your limitation and doing something about it.
All right, Helga, you had there was a question in there you wanted to drop an answer to.
Yeah, so Bronos asked, how do you help someone stop abusing themselves? Pew pew, I am the captain of self-abuse. You can ask any of the people that have worked with me as trainers. It was a very bad and toxic trait of mine that I abused myself if I was not what I felt was successful. So key tools to this is removing compare and despair, identifying it in yourself and identifying it in your students. When are they or you setting yourself up to fail because you are choosing a bar or somebody else to compare yourself to and always setting yourself up for failure because they're always doing better, or you're just choosing to do that because you can't look inside yourself at that point in time. That is one of the things where you revert back. You start into the I statements instead of like that person. Like if you're talking about that person and then you like, yeah, but yourself, that's a problem. So that's reverting the I, into the I mindset, and that gets you back into assessing yourself and removing the other person that you have now set a bar against. The second one is actually removing the simple statement of I should. I should is a terrible response to anything while you are analyzing video, while you're watching your own fights, while you're in the middle of fights. I should be able to blah. Nope, apparently you can't right now. So you're not actually assessing yourself. What you need to do is you need to get to the mindset of, I know I have the capability of doing this. Why is it currently not working? This puts you into an analytical mindset. It gets rid of the emotional investment of I should, is an emotionally invested mindset where you are making yourself fail in any situation instead of learning and turning it into data points. These are two of the key things. So you can set your students up, all your students or all the people you work with over time, you're going to find out what works for them because everybody comes with their own little weird lockbox of mind fuckery and how they deal with failure. And a lot of the times you'll find it I should, or they're looking outside of themselves and comparing against a bar that is actually unrealistic at that point in time. And so just ID those two things. Other tools, don't let them actually say something negative. If they're only feeding you negative or critical feedback to you, flip it on its head. Cool, what'd you do well? How can we now apply this to the negative that you just said? Like, is this a foundational block? Do we need to install a foundational block? Get them speaking about how to move forward in their training. This is a really good trick to get the mind back into the training mode and getting it back into the analytical mode instead of just sitting there and being like, well, I messed up. Also, one of the things that I literally did for a while is I made myself pout like that. If I was talking negatively about myself, I'd be like, well, I messed up and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, that is unadult. And like, I literally just found ways to unlock my brain so I couldn't take myself seriously when I was emotionally abusing myself. Find those triggers in your students. They will be super obvious when you find them, and then you can just use them, and you'll find that it takes about 6 months. It actually takes about 6 months of hardcore rewiring in the human brain before they will pick up the habits naturally. So just remind them, like, make a cue card. Like, you don't get to use I should. Like, that is off your list. You're not allowed to throw raps. You don't get to say I should. There you go. And so as you go along, find what works for your students, and they'll tell you right out the gate how to give them a positive way to analyze themselves.
Yeah, I tell you, along those lines, early in my fighting career, and this kind of piles onto the coulda, woulda, shoulda. I mean, that is definitely an emotional response. I mean, that's an emotional investment for sure. Early on in my fighting career, I was getting right home from my night, and I said, Brian, did you ever have one of those days where you just felt like you were just never going to be good enough and you're just never going to get there? And Brian said, what the hell are you talking about? You've been fighting for 3 months. Like, you should suck at this point. But, I was, I mean, it's you know, I was young, and you know, I wanted that success now. And man, talk about the coulda, woulda, shoulda. I mean, it was, you know, and it was a hard lesson for me to learn. You know, because I'd gone in the military, and when I got back, I had this idea of how, you know, that I could have been king. And you know, and that I wasted all this time while I was in the military and all this other stuff. And every time I did not win Crown Tourney or did not win Cornet List, I was just abusive to myself. I really was. It was, you know, it was like, I'm never going to be good enough. I'm, you know, it's like I could have, would have, should have. If I would have stayed, I could have done this thing. And you know, you don't get that time back. And you know, and it wasn't until I was finally able to let go of that bullshit that I was able to fight free, and I was able to realize that I'm going to go deep in the list. So I'm going to fight well, and yeah, I'm going to win Crown at some point. And maybe it's not today, but I'm going to. But I could not have had the success that I've had over the last 25 years if I was still holding on to all that just, God, this just awful nonsense. And that's what Helga was just talking about. You know, I should have done this. I could have done this. You know, if I would have done this. It's just nonsense, and you gotta let that go.
Yeah.
Sagan, do you have something on that?
Yeah, sometimes you just have to get out of your own way. You know, a lot of this negative talk, and you know, a danger point is as the more we see as fighters, the more we experience as fighters at the level we're at, and we're watching people at a higher level, right? We're seeing all this stuff as possible. Right? It's like we're seeing all this. I could have, I should have. Well, wait, you know, and it's like, no. Where you are in your training, your practice, and your combat right now is where you are. And when you perform those, you see the results in that one fight, that one movement, even. And so you really, you know, sometimes you just can't be all that critical. And you use the self-assessment. You use the tools you have, you speak with your coach, your trainer, and you work out what's really going on. But again, make it a positive thing.
Helga, you got your hand up?
Yeah. I just realized it's simple words. Apparently they don't work for me today. Is instead, I should is in reverse time. How I would is moving forward. So if you talk about a deficiency in a set of fights while watching video, don't say, I should have dealt with it this way. Say, in the future, I wish to address it this way, or I'm going to address it this way, or I'm going to attempt this technique. That gets it out of your language patterns for a while, especially if you have somebody that's really bad about that, is just make them speak in the future. Like, cool, we're not focusing on the past. We're using this as data points. Now you get to talk like this fight is happening in the future. It's another trick to use. And I just realized I forgot to say that.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Go ahead, Octane.
I think that's a really great statement. The past is success or failure, and we learn from it so that we can move forward, so that we can apply the things that we've learned. The only time it's bad is when you don't get a chance to apply it and grow and learn from it. If your cup is so full, the other part of this is going through all that assessment, then take a minute to reevaluate a truth, empty your cup, and move forward. Don't keep living on those past victories or the past losses. If you're so stuck on, the worst thing is to get stuck on all those victories and not grow because you think, well, I can just do that again. I don't need anything else. I'll just do that again. Those are the lies we tell ourselves.
Right. I think Helga also had another question that she was. Did you have another one you were looking at answering there?
Oh yeah. So I tend to be an overthinker and overanalyzer. When it comes to breaking down victory conditions into smaller goals, is there a point where it can actually become detrimental to your victories? Yes. One of the things is when you are so focused on success. So victory conditions are passing. You can go back and revisit them. And you can reuse them. But part of the thing is when we try to break them down into smaller and smaller steps, what we do is we start over focusing in a fight. And so if you find that you're like, oh, well, I'm turning my, like, unless you are in the top 2%, and I'm just going to be really blunt about this, unless you're in the top 2% of our fighting community, you shouldn't be thinking, I'm turning my foot 5 degrees too far in this one shot. probably guarantee that problem is coming out of something else at that point in time. That is an over analysis and breakdown. What you should be looking at is, I don't feel like I'm putting my foot in the right place. Why is this occurring? And so your newer fighters, big goal victory conditions, very broad victory conditions. Tonight, I want to work on delivering my flat snap with power. Mid-range unbelt, condition. I want to make sure that I'm delivering my flat snap with power into these 3 zones. High end, 1.25 inches, and I'm going to deliver that every time. And so there's a difference in scope. As you go up in your fighting path and career and your skill level, you can narrow your victory conditions down. When you are starting out fighting, very broad victory conditions. Give yourself room to play and learn, because if you try to make every piece perfect, you're going to set yourself up for failure.
Yeah, and I think that touches on an important point too, is that, as you become a better fighter, it becomes, I mean, you it's not that you run out of things that you need to fix, but the degree to which you need to improve the different parts of the fight become very nuanced. And it is much more difficult to identify what needs to be fixed, especially if you're winning fights, because as you start winning fights, there always has to be something to fix. And when I talk about both of these things, victory conditions and ruthless assessment, I am always working under the impression that there is always something wrong with your fight. There has to be something wrong with your fight. If there's nothing wrong with your fight, then you're a perfect fighting specimen and you don't need us, right? There always has to be something wrong. It becomes increasingly difficult to identify what those things are. And it may require a greater deal of ruthlessness later down the road. Yes, as Helga was mentioning, it's when you're talking about footwork, it's, I need to be in ABCD range in the beginning of it. And, later as you're looking at footwork, I mean, I've had, Sagan look at me from time to time and say, if you pull your back foot up by about 3 inches, you'll be able to get to this better. Right. There are very few people that have that kind of eye to be able to see that sort of stuff, but you have to be willing and open to that level of evaluation and assessment. And the better you get as a fighter, the more difficult it is to find the people that can do that. And the harder it is to be open to that, because what you're doing is getting you victories. It's getting you wins. And that ends up being kind of a false positive, if you will. So, Sagan, you got more on that?
Well, we've said this quite a bit now, but it is true, right? Again, trust but verify. We know what training is. We know what practice is. We know what combat is. So there's no reason to belabor those points. The past is the past. Yeah, a second ago. Leave it alone. Didn't work, and I didn't do that. Yes, so keep right on going. Again, make it positive. Try to be that person that, again, in a self-assessment, it's happening on the day of the tournament, right? How am I feeling today? What's going on? Oh, I didn't do that, right? And if somebody comes to you and say, hey, did you see that? And you did, and you say, yeah, but the trigger didn't go off. I'm not worried about it, right? We move forward. By grace, we move forward. We learn, and we learn through experience as well as we learn through being taught. And if we teach ourselves to be self-destructive, we will be.
Yeah. Octa?
I was just seeing a couple of questions here, and somebody was talking about how not to just win because somebody else loses. I would say my big word for that lately has been deliberate. When I'm working with folks online and we're talking about throwing blows or mechanics and stuff, I'm like, make it deliberate. It's like I used to shoot pool in my younger days pretty competitively, and slop doesn't count. There's nothing worse than knowing you beat somebody with a sloppy shot. It just feels bad. But there's everything to be gained when your opponent knows they're beat and you're still 2 steps away from hitting them with a stick, because the deliberate actions are going to be glorious. So when you're practicing, when you're doing your victory conditions, be deliberate in what you're trying to achieve, and ask those questions. That's another great way to find goals when you're kind of stuck or plateaued. Start questioning techniques. What if I do this? And if you're lucky enough to have somebody with a great mind for fighting nearby, you guys can start asking questions and working on technique, and then something cool comes from it, and boom, away you're going again. A whole new path, a whole new set of conditions, goals, and assessment.
Yeah, we had practice a couple of weeks ago, and one of my former squires stepped wrong, absolutely wrong, and later he had to explain that I had killed him without throwing a shot, because it was just one of those situations where you find yourself in absolutely the wrong position, and you just know that, like, I'm just beaten. Like, you don't even have to throw a shot, because I just know that I did everything, so wrong that that I just got beat. And that's all part of this conversation is, like, sometimes you need to look at that and realize that you don't have to rip my head off for me to know that I'm just bested, that I'm just beaten.
How awesome is that when you're in a fight enough and you are paying attention to your actions, that you know you've been beaten before the stick.
Mhm.
I mean,
Yeah.
that's huge. That shows huge mental acuity there, to be able to
Absolutely.
understand the fight enough to go, oh, yep, checkmate in 2. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. So we just had another question that came up on the thread there. What is a good number of victory conditions to start with while training? An example of something is to make a list of 6 things, and we'll have my squire choose a minimum of 2 things to work on during practice. So, Helga, do you want to take a shot at that?
Oh, yeah, I'm happy to. This is one of those ones where, again, you're going to have to look at your training level and your student's training level. You got a new fighter, 2 victory conditions max. Like, brand new fighter, let's go with 1. Like, give simple things, make that a very adaptable victory condition. That mid-level, like, unbelts up to like mid-level knights, pretty much the max of 3. The brain is going to hold roughly 3 ideas at any given time and allow you to still be in a training mindset where you can assess and come back with some data points on that. Beyond that 3, even in the super high end, you're not going to see that. You're just going to see those 3 refined down a little bit more. They're going to be a narrower scope and give that focus, because the brain is a very simple thing when stressed. You get 3 actions before the brain then just boots one of them out. So I have seen a couple people be able to hold 4 to 5. I don't really recommend doing that. I think you're going to set yourself up for failure, and you're going to set yourself up for frustration. So start small. And then also you will learn how many you can hold and still be successful in seeking them. So again, try. New fighters, start small, broad idea. More experienced fighters, 3-ish, narrower ideas.
Yeah, it's one of those things that, again, we're talking about the gambit from the person who's just now picking up a stick all the way to the top 2%. One of the ideas here is that across that line, as Her Grace said, right, the brain is a very simple functioning thing, but it doesn't like data floods. And it sometimes doesn't deal with maximum conditions being dealt to it, in that 1 would have been enough, 3, I'm not even there. So whatever is agreed upon between the 2 people on that night. One night your squire may go, yeah, I can work on all of those. I got this. Another night they may say, you know what, this one's complex enough, I want to work on the 1. And some nights you're going to say, you know what, I showed up, I want to take that as my victory condition for the evening. Across all of that, there is, again, the victory condition is met. There was collaboration and communication between those involved. Now, if you've done your self-assessment and you go to practice and you have 3 things laid out, well, then now can you keep up with them, right? And if you can't, maybe next time you do 2. And again, we're coming to a positive outcome for whether you're training, practicing, or you're doing combat, but make it real.
And I find with victory conditions, sometimes, especially when you get people that are super enthusiastic and they want it all, they want to eat the elephant in 2 bites. I like goals. I'm a total about instant gratification. set up small goals that lead to medium-sized goals that lead to larger goals. And within those goals, now you can start cataloging victory conditions. Okay, we want to be able to hit this spot on a heater shield when somebody leaves this gap. Okay, let's start with how do you get there with your feet? Okay, and maybe at the same time we can work on techniques for throwing a flat snap. And then we build onto, okay, now where are the lines at? And you can start building these little victory conditions that give you that instant gratification. And oh, by the way, a couple of weeks from now, you'll be able to see a measurable evolution of that goal with those victory conditions. So now you're combining these and you're creating a roadmap that, okay, so I'm getting closer to this big goal. So maybe just biting off these smaller victory conditions one at a time, I can see progress. So you get that instant gratification. You still have that end goal you can hit. And then the next goal is to enter my first tournament, or to maybe be able to control myself in the tournament and not let somebody manipulate my lines.
Yeah. Same thing, Octane. Just had a thought and it just disappeared just like that.
You guys are old.
Oh, sorry. The real question. So how many things can you keep at one time? As Helga said, you can only keep a maximum of 3, and you want to, like, they're optional, right? You have these three things that you could be working on throughout the night, and as you trying to work on one, if you're just not getting that concept, or you're just not able to execute that, then you can move on to one of the others and change that up. And then at the end of the night, that's when you have to look at that ruthless self-assessment again and say, did I meet my victory conditions? What did my practice look like? Did I actually work on the things I said I was going to work on, or did I just go and just kill people, right? Which feels good, but doesn't make you a better fighter.
I'll say one more thing when it comes to victory conditions and ruthless assessment alike is so many people will come out and they'll say, okay, my victory condition tonight, I'm going to fight each fighter. I'm going to ask them for 3 of their best fights, and we're going to go fight them. And then you run into that person at the end of the night, and here come the excuses. Oh, I didn't bring the right shoes to practice tonight. I didn't sleep very well. I didn't eat right before I came. I didn't have enough water. The only person those kind of excuses hurt are yourself. So we're back to that honesty. So whenever you set these things up, it's okay not to do the best. Take the information and the measurement and the calibration for what it is, honest input, and don't taint it. Don't devalue your opponent or yourself by excusing bad performance or the lack of achieving those victory conditions.
So we have another question that popped up that I think is a great one. It's like, have any of you been asked to translate the concept of victory conditions for the pursuit of excellence in other areas? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is not an SCA concept by any stretch of the imagination. It's not even a Marshall concept. When we look at things like we look at the Book of Five Rings by Musashi. That is a book that in the bookstores is typically sold in the business management section, because it is a book that talks about how to defeat an opponent. And it happens to reference it around, a short sword and a long sword. But it's the greater lesson of that book is how to defeat an opponent. And yeah, it is in the business management section. And we are going to actually next week, we're going to be doing an episode on some of our favorite books. We're going to be talking about that, and Book of Five Rings no doubt will be coming up on that one. But yeah, this is something that my wife works in healthcare as well, and she was putting together a lesson plan for a presentation, and people are asking questions, and she's like, victory conditions. I mean, these are things that small, all the small attainable goals. It's just being able to put these into manageable things so that you can feel like you're actually making some kind of progress on things. So I know Helga's been able to apply these concepts in the real world as well.
So I use these concepts all the time. Business management, actually office management, in dealing with riding horses or art or anything else like that. It's victory conditions. Just because we have the word victory does not mean that it needs to be some like sport involved. Victory is about the idea of you creating a platform that you feel that you are winning on, or winning in quotes, you are progressing on. And so you can use this concept and the idea of like, cool, right now I'm working on this piece of art and my line work isn't as straight as I would like it to be. So I'm just going to sit here and I'm just going to draw a bunch of lines, which I'll tell you is really boring, but it works. And so use victory conditions in everything. You want to be a better driver? Cool. I'm going to go research defensive driving and use this. And I'm setting myself up the 3 things I'm going to practice and work on. And then when I get those, great, I've reached my victory conditions. On to the next set of tools I need to develop to be better. And they actually talk about this pretty extensively in the talent code and about how you rewire your brain. And so I will actually talk about one of those in the process of victory conditions work really well while recovering from injuries. This is actually a key concept of setting yourself up to come back to what you want to do. You will never be the fighter you were. You'll never be the person you were after a major injury. You can be just as good. You can be even better. I sure as hell am. But you have to set victory conditions up in the process. You're never going to jump back in. Victory conditions is really good for recovering right now, guys. We've sat for a year plus. You're going to need victory conditions to get off the couch. And if that is your victory condition is once a day, I'm going to get off the couch and I'm going to walk and touch my pal. Not even pick up a stick. I'm going to touch my pal. And then I'm going to walk back inside. Cool, great. It's getting you moving. So use it and apply it. And also figure out the word that feeds you. If victory doesn't feed you, use whatever word you need to make this concept work. We just all happen to use victory conditions in the process.
Oh, yeah. Octa?
I would just add, for me, I'm very visual. So I leave myself notes. I've got my Pel going. I've got a sword sitting behind my desk usually. I've got my kettlebell and my mace bell sitting behind my desk. So constant reminders of things that I need to pick up and progress with. So any sort of tools you need to employ to do that. And then Branos had a great question about when do you think you should review your victory conditions? And I would say constantly. After you've practiced your victory condition or you've employed whatever it is that you're doing that. If my victory condition is to go for a 30-minute walk at lunch. All right, I did it. I reevaluate. Hey, how do my feet feel? How does my wind? Hey, I should up that to 45 minutes. Or wow, my foot hurts. I may have to change shoes and go do that. Something simple as that to, hey, my victory condition is to get out and throw 100 blows. Well, I did that, but they were all pretty sloppy. So maybe I need to refine that victory condition, slow it down and make it more deliberate and more accurate to a technique. So I think constant evaluation, not to the point where you are watering yourself down and causing a bunch of self-doubt, but I do believe that constantly checking those is a good thing.
It's one of those things where we keep talking about the self. Well, we're going to keep talking about the self. And the idea is, what do you need for you? What gives you the greatest percentage of being successful? Is it writing it down? Not only that, we talked earlier about, for this one training session, for this one practice, I have this victory condition. Okay. However, 3 months out, I have this other victory condition. And before I get there, I have 2 prerequisites. Okay. If you can remember those, if you're not journaling and you're not tracking your progress towards those or at those, or if they change and you remove them, okay. Whatever makes you successful is what you need to do. But when we're talking about an immediate victory condition of okay, tonight at training, I am, tonight at practice, I am, today, as Sir Octa said, I'm going to go for a walk. Whatever it is, those demand near immediate attention. And that is where you start to get into the habit of setting them, acknowledging them, and then addressing them. And that is key, is getting into that chain of events as early on as you can, and then keep right on going.
Yeah, and to follow up on that, as far as, when to evaluate, as Octa said, constantly. But again, that could be at, you know, at practice or in training, and, breaking down every step of the training process has an opportunity for you to establish victory conditions, for you to have met those. And, and as Helga was alluding to earlier, it's like, whatever term you want to use for this. I mean, the whole point of this is what has to happen in order for you to feel like you have success. Because ultimately, failure sucks. Nobody likes feeling like a failure. Winning always feels better. We're just trying to break down what success means, and being able to break that down into smaller chunks, and to know that, the progress that I made on my footwork tonight eventually is going to lead to victories down the road, right? As I've said many times, body count or wins in our sport is a convenient byproduct of the progress that we make in our sport. It's not the other way around. We don't get body count and say, look what a great fighter I am. Progress happens. We become better fighters, and then eventually, like, we just look behind us and there's this whole string of bodies, and you don't know how they got there, right? And that all comes from being able to break these things down. And it is a constant reevaluation. And you go to when you're doing a drill, part of when we teach people how to do a drill and we set it up to begin with, we say, this is what the drill is, this is the objective of this drill, and your success is doing this part of it, right? Like I was talking about earlier with the 2-second drill, the success here is mitigated on, I got my stick back to my starting position before I delivered the next blow. As long as you do that, I'm much less concerned about the quality of each of those blows as I am in you actually completing the recovery, because that's the point of it. And so, yeah, you constantly have to reevaluate these things, and it's always situational. Whatever part of your fight that you're working on, this is a day-to-day operation. And as with any other goal, you have long-term goals and short-term goals. All those goals should be measurable. They should be attainable. They should be ambitious. But it all starts day to day. And when you get done with practice on a weekly basis, you have to ask, did I actually put in the work that I said I was going to put into it? And then when you get to a tournament later, did I actually execute the way that I have been executing at practice, the way I've been practicing? As Sagan says all the time, we practice, like we do combat like we do practice. And we always want the training and the practice to become more and more like live combat, so that by the time we get to the tournament, that's just who we are anyway, right?
So I just wanted to pile in on this real quick, if I may. One of the things that came up is journaling. And I'm just going to be a giant millennial here for a moment. Stop carrying around a physical journal you can't share. You have this, all of us text really, really fast. Do a Google Doc. You want to know what's really cool about a Google Doc? You can embed links and then send them to your trainers. So you start the night, you get in there, you type out your three goals, and then when you're done, go back to your computer and type out what happened, and then make sure that all your trainers have access to it. Embed the links, like upload them to YouTube, embed the links for that practice, organize it by date, and go from there. And then you have a continuous log that doesn't get lost. And eventually, one day, when you're sitting there and you've got a gaggle of squares around you, you send them your Google Doc and you're like, go read the entry from 4 years ago. Like, legitimately, I was working on the same thing you are right now. I had the same frustrations. You are not alone in this. And here is my journey also, so you can see this. Also, it's way harder to lose than a journal. Like, as the person that has lost way more fighting journals than I ever should have, I will tell you, my phone saves my butt for journaling.
And you always know where your phone is.
Maybe.
All right. So we're getting close to the top of the hour here. Before we start wrapping up with final comments here, I do want to share again the link for, if I can find this back here, So we have a Coach's Corner library, and we'd mentioned this earlier before when we talked about Count Steinar, who was on for one of our conversations a few months ago. He has several links in our library, and we have a lot of good resources available here. Sive, do you want to go ahead and share that?
I threw it up on Facebook real quick.
Okay. There you go. So we've got the training library out there, and you can actually look under coaches. You can look on Count Steinar, and you're going to see the videos that he has that cover some of those mechanics as we were talking about earlier. So definitely want to take a look at that. So that's one of the things we've been putting out there that hopefully is going to be a big benefit to everybody. So.
Got another question there.
Sure. Yeah, go ahead.
So is Crown a good place to assess and evaluate? Absolutely. I mean, that's what we train for, right? And it doesn't matter how much everybody else has been training or how awesome everybody else is. Again, this is about you. This is about you getting a realistic and honest to God. Hopefully you're getting the best fight that your opponent has to give you. If they're not, then I don't know what they're doing there. That's truth. That's more than a practice or a backyard tournament or anything else. Those are people performing at their absolute best. That's what you want to get feedback from. You want to know if you went out there and were able to maneuver and execute your plan, not somebody else's plan. That's art, right? I always think about laurels who get months to perfect a painting or a scroll or an item. We work all this time honing our art skills, and we get 5 seconds to perform art or 5 minutes to perform art, depending on what we're doing. And it's out there. It can't be erased. It can't be modified. That 5-second fight is what it is. All of the judgment, all of the technique, everything is out there live and sometimes recorded forever on video. So our art history is pretty pure in a Crown tournament. It is going to be what it's going to be. So that's absolutely a great place to assess your own performance. Not anybody else's, not based on anybody else's, but how you perform.
True. Crown. Okay. So here we go. It's just another tournament. It's a bunch of fights. You've trained, you've practiced. Now you will perform as trained and practiced. But you will perform in each fight in that one fight. Now, if you err, okay, yes. Self-assessment, as we said, good thing. Self-demoralization, self-destruction, no. If you start down that path in a performance, okay, Crown, tournament, whatever it is, where you are performing as you trained and practiced, and you take the mental side and you chuck it out the window because you loaded it up with a bunch of self stuff that doesn't need to be there, that's a different story. But you're taking an assessment across a couple of fights and you're going, this one combination isn't quite there, but I have noticed I'm stronger in this other thing, right? And again, we are success-based. Now, again, we've already said absolute winning is not the only success available. Recognition of a performance enhancement is just as good to me, if not better, right? And you take that and you put it, again, maybe in your phone, for those that are paper version or whatever, right? And you keep track, right? Now you are there, again, we're specifically talking about Crown. You're there to perform as you've trained and practiced to this point. Keeping track of things, okay, that's one thing. But again, don't knock yourself out of the water. Okay, you're there to learn where you are. The other thing to remember is a Crown tournament has X number of fights where the victor fought a number of people one time and one person maybe twice. Does that prove any consistency against any of those individuals in truth? And that's the other point to remember. You here you are. It is what it was, and you walk away with the lessons it offered.
And just to add to that, in a Crown, I might be adjusting or assessing my abilities. Am I feeling fast enough to throw certain techniques? But I'm not harping on the last fight. I'm not taking a victory from the last fight to my next fight, and I'm not taking the loss from my last fight to my next fight. The next person I'm going to meet deserves Octamasades as he is right now, not as he was 10 minutes ago.
Indeed.
He'll be 20 minutes ago. And they don't, I get very emotional about this. When I step through the Eric, I've left all the baggage in my armor bag. My work problems, successes stay in the armor bag. Putting up my tent the night before, stay in the armor bag. When I go out in that Eric, that person deserves my absolute best. And I expect that whatever that is, it might not be my best fight all the time, but it'll be the best fight I have right then and there. So that's my soapbox.
Helga, you're next.
How do you follow that? So I actually have a different way of looking at it. So Crown is a total assessment, but you walk out there with what we call a wildly unattainable goal. I'm going to win the day. That's it. So Crown is the assessment. And so you don't walk out there in training mode. You don't walk out there with a lot of extra victory conditions. Do I know what my victory condition is? Kill the dude. If I fail that victory condition, then I get to analyze why. But part of the thing is don't make extra noise in your head. And this is a different approach. And it happens to be an approach that I have to, because otherwise I'll analyze the fight to the death of me, like in the middle of the fight. My one victory condition, put that dude down. If I don't put that dude down, guess what? That's in the past, and that's an I should, and I'm not going to even talk about it until I'm out of the list. But I am walking out there with what we affectionately call a wildly unattainable goal of, I'm going to win. Because if I walk out there with the idea that I'm not going to, I am already setting myself up for failure and putting that thought in my head. So That day, very small, very refined victory condition. Murder that dude with elegance. Moving on.
Yeah, and I kind of wanted to touch on something that Octa was talking about, and then Branos also mentioned in the list there. The thing about Crown Tournament in particular is at Crown Tournament, the comment that Branos had mentioned in the thread here is that you're not necessarily fighting the best fighters in your kingdom in that list. So Crown Tournament isn't necessarily the best evaluation for where you are as a fighter. It's just the most consistent evaluation. And by that I mean everybody that you fight in that list is fighting at or above their normal fighting ability, right? They are fighting absolutely the best they can. They're executing the best they possibly can because everything is on the line right there. And it is a situation that you simply cannot simulate anywhere else. You know, this idea that, oh, I want you to give me your crown fights. That's an interesting concept, but until we're actually in crown, you just can't quite manifest the emotional investment that is involved in crown that kind of feeds that type of fight and that desire to execute correctly. So it's very difficult to kind of simulate that outside. And so crown is not, it's not necessarily the best evaluation. It's just the most consistent. It's the one that every 6 months it's like clockwork. We literally set our calendars by this, right? we know that every 6 months we're going to go to crown, and everything that we do from in that 6 months in between the next one is going to play out in the performance art that Octa had alluded to, because that's basically what we're doing, and especially in Crown Tourney, we are doing performance art to an extent. You get that one opportunity right then and there to execute your fight, and it's either good enough or it's not. And after the end of that, you have to look at that, you have to evaluate that. And part of the ruthless self-assessment that you have to look at it there is like, okay, say I didn't win the list, right? If I don't win Crown Tourney, what am I doing, right? Is the work that I'm doing at home the kind of work that needs to be done to really be able to excel in Crown Tourney? And sometimes if you get deeper in the list, you keep improving, you keep getting deeper in the list, the answer to that may very well be yes, that this is the type of work that I need to be doing. And so we keep doing this type of work, or you know, I'm doing the level of work or the type of work that needs to be done to advance in this particular list. But again, you're not competing against necessarily the best fighters in your kingdom. You're just competing against the best fighters in your kingdom who feel like they can do that job, and you're competing against them on that day. And yeah, and it is a snapshot. But yeah, you absolutely, that's absolutely a good time to reevaluate everything. I mean, it is one of the, again, it's just the most consistent evaluation that we have, and so that's the time to take from that list, and because that is the execution, right? That's the pinnacle of our execution. And if you want to know what you need to fix, crown turning is the place where you're going to find out what is truly wrong with your fight. Right. So yeah, we're at the top of the hour. So I'd like to thank everybody for the comments on the Facebook feed. It's been really great conversation. Hopefully this has been helpful to everybody. And again, we wanted to give a definition of terms that we use on this show all the time. And you'll find that, you know, the best coaches that you're going to find out there are going to use these terms in similar ways. And so we kind of wanted to lay that out a little bit more and kind of give some more concrete examples of how we use that and what that looks like. What do you think? So Sagan, would you like to give us some final thoughts?
Well, again, thank you everybody for welcoming us into your home on another Friday night. I wish everyone a happy Easter, by the way. The thing that His Grace just said is very true. You've heard the same thing out of numerous mouths tonight, voiced in similar ways, but slightly different. And I'm hoping that they struck home with the listener of that one type of thread, that one comment, that one that you can mine from all of this, and that we have assisted you. And please feel free to contact us for further assistance.
All right.
Up next.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just like to go back to the start with Sean's analogy of eating the elephant. Everybody watching here can eat the elephant. It's just how you go about doing it and who you invite to the party to help you consume it. And it can be a solo journey at times. It can be a group journey. You know, the beautiful thing about our sport is we're really a village. I can go out and try and utterly remove somebody from a list, and then we can go talk about it, laugh, and go have another fight, because we're lifting each other up. So tap in your community and find the tools that work best for you, and but do something. Set the goals, set the victory conditions.
Yeah. And Helga?
As you've heard me say multiple times, learn how to be kind to yourself and your students so you can be honest about what your actual goals are and where you want to be and how you're going to get there. If you try to bully yourself or anybody else into doing it, you're just going to set them up for failure. So be kind, be ruthlessly kind, and get the job done. But that's the way we actually all thrive. And that goes right back to where Octa just said of reach out to your community. When you are starting to bully yourself, reach out to somebody else that has more faith than you do. They will apply it and they will give it to you so you can continue to move forward and learn how to be kind again. And also, thank you very much for having me on the show. I've had a blast.
Not again. You had fun again?
Yeah, I know. I seem to like you guys.
Yeah.
You should ruthlessly assess that. And
Yeah.
We'll all get our cred notes after this. So
Yeah. All right. So thanks again for everybody for joining us. And we'd like to thank Her Excellency Saiv for hosting tonight in Vesper's absence. So done a great job fielding questions for us. We really appreciate and for those of you that are not aware, that Saiv is part of our coaching staff, and she does a lot of work for us behind the scenes, mostly keeping all these cats herded and giving us some direction and kind of keeping us focused in a good direction there. So it's been a great show. Thanks again for all the questions, comments. Helga, thank you so much for joining us on this. You're always welcome. We love hearing your input on this.
Yeah.
Let's see. So yeah, next week we have we're going to do an episode on some of our favorite books, possibly movies or TV series, and some other media that we can be watching to consuming to make us better fighters. We've mentioned several books throughout the last year. So we're going to do a little deeper dive on some of those things, and why it is that we prefer using some of this material, and some of the greater lessons that we've got out of that. So yeah, thanks again, everybody, and everybody have a good night.
Night, everybody.
Everyone.